Welcome back to the deep dive. You guys have sent in some pretty interesting academic papers lately on financial systems,
Oh, yeah.
and we are super stoked to dig into them with you.
Yeah, this is going to be fun.
So today we're going deep on the work of Gurley and Shaw and McKinnon and Shaw.
Right.
These economists really shook things up in the world of finance with their ideas about near money and financial repression.
Yeah, these ideas might sound kind of obscure at first glance,
Right.
but they are surprisingly relevant to
Yeah.
how we understand, financial markets today.
Totally.
And even like how we make decisions about our own money.
Absolutely. So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
Those traditional measures of money supply we always hear about,
Yeah.
like how much cash is circulating in the economy.
Right.
Well, Gurley and Shaw argued that, those measures don't tell the whole story.
They don't.
They introduced this concept of near monies,
Uh-huh.
which are assets that aren't technically cash,
Mm-hmm.
but can be easily converted into cash.
Right. So think of it this way.
Okay.
Imagine you have money in a savings account
Okay.
at a credit union.
Yeah.
It's not cash in your hand,
Right.
but you can withdraw it pretty easily, right?
Yeah.
So that's an example of a near money.
Okay. I'm starting to see the picture.
Good.
But why are these near monies so important?
Well, because Gurley and Shaw argued that these near monies can actually influence
Okay.
the effectiveness of monetary policy.
Wow.
Imagine a seesaw. Okay. You got supply on one side, demand on the other.
Okay.
When near monies enter the picture,
Yeah.
it's like adding weight to the demand side,
Uh-huh.
making it harder for the central bank to tip that seesaw
Okay.
and control interest rates.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Thanks.
So if the central bank is trying to cool down the economy by raising interest rates,
Yeah.
those near monies could make their efforts less effective.
Exactly, because people could just shift their money from near monies into cash if they think that interest rates are going to rise even further.
Wow, it's like a shadow money supply
Yeah,
operating in parallel to the traditional one.
that's a good way to put it.
So how did Gurley and Shaw actually model this complex dynamic?
Well, they used a classic supply and demand graph
Yeah.
to show how the presence of near monies can affect the relationship between interest rates and the overall money supply.
Okay.
Think of the graph as like a map of the financial landscape.
Mm-hmm.
The higher the interest rate, the taller the mountain.
Okay.
What they showed is that near monies can smooth out those mountains and valleys,
Interesting.
making the impact of interest rate changes less dramatic.
So their work essentially highlighted the limitations of traditional monetary policy tools.
Yes, and they also argued that regulators need to pay closer attention to these non-bank financial institutions
Okay.
where near monies are often held.
That makes sense if these near monies are having such a significant impact.
Yeah.
It's important to understand how they're being managed and regulated. I see why their work was so groundbreaking.
Absolutely. And, it led to some real-world changes.
Like what?
For example, Nigeria's Banking and Other Financial Institutions Decree,
Yeah,
or BOFID for short.
you go for it.
Yeah, it was actually influenced by Gurley and Shaw's ideas,
Interesting.
and it brought a wider range of financial institutions under the central bank's supervision.
Interesting. So their work wasn't just theoretical.
No,
It had real-world implications.
real-world impact, yeah.
I'm already starting to see how these seemingly academic concepts
Yeah,
can actually have a tangible impact on financial systems.
absolutely. Now, you might be wondering, how does this affect me?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Well, think about your own savings and investments.
Okay.
Let's say you're worried about inflation eroding the value of your money.
Yeah.
Are you only considering traditional bank accounts?
Right.
Or are you exploring other options that might offer higher returns, like
Mhm.
index funds or even certain types of cryptocurrencies?
That's a great point.
Ah,
It makes me realize that I need to be more aware of the full range of financial instruments available to me
yeah.
and how they might be affected by factors like the presence of near monies.
It's all about understanding the bigger picture of financial markets
Right.
and how your own decisions fit in.
Okay, so we've unpacked near money.
Yeah.
But you mentioned another key concept,
Mm-hmm.
financial repression.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean?
So financial repression is essentially when a government intervenes in financial markets
Okay.
in a way that benefits itself,
Mm-hmm.
often at the expense of individual savers.
Oh, wow.
One common example is setting artificially low interest rate ceilings
Okay.
on savings accounts.
So it's like the government is saying, hey, you can save your money,
Yeah.
but we're going to dictate how much interest you earn on it.
Pretty much.
That doesn't seem very fair.
Well, it can be quite controversial,
Yeah.
especially from the perspective of individuals trying to build wealth.
All right.
It's a topic that was deeply explored by another duo of economists,
Okay.
McKinnon and Shaw,
Right.
who argued that such intervention could actually harm economic growth in the long run.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Financial repression sounds pretty heavy.
It can be? Yeah.
How exactly did McKinnon and Shaw argue that it impacts economic growth?
Well, they developed a model,
Okay.
also using graphs,
Okay.
that illustrated how artificially low interest rates can discourage savings. It's kind of like this,
Yeah.
if you know you're not going to earn much interest on your savings,
Right.
you might be less motivated to save in the first place, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I know I would be less inclined to save if the returns were minimal.
Exactly. And this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
McKinnon and Shaw argued that this decrease in savings ultimately leads to less investment in the economy.
Okay.
Imagine this. When banks have less money to lend out,
Right.
businesses have less access to capital for expansion, innovation, and job creation.
So it creates a ripple effect throughout the entire economy.
Yeah,
Lower savings lead to lower investment, which ultimately stifles growth.
precisely. They advocated for what's called financial liberalization,
Okay.
which essentially means removing these interest rate ceilings
Ah.
and allowing markets to determine interest rates more freely.
So that sounds like the opposite of financial repression.
It is.
But wouldn't allowing interest rates to rise uncontrollably lead to problems for borrowers?
That's a valid concern, and there's always a risk of going too far in either direction.
Right.
McKinnon and Shaw weren't arguing for complete deregulation,
Okay.
but rather for a more balanced approach
Okay.
that takes into account the needs of both savers and borrowers.
Right.
They believed that by allowing interest rates to rise to their natural equilibrium, you incentivize savings,
Okay.
which then leads to a more efficient allocation of capital,
Right.
ultimately boosting economic growth.
So it's all about striking that delicate balance.
It is.
Now, I'm curious, how do their ideas connect with what Gurley and Shaw were arguing about? We've got near monies over here,
Right.
financial repression over there.
Yeah,
Are they related in any way?
that's a great question. They might seem like separate issues, but they actually intertwine in some fascinating ways.
Okay.
Remember how Gurley and Shaw highlighted the importance of near monies
Yeah.
and how they can influence the effectiveness of monetary policy?
Yes. Those shadow money supplies lurking in the background.
Well, financial repression can actually exacerbate the impact of near monies.
Whoa, wow.
Think about it. If interest rates on traditional savings accounts are artificially suppressed,
Right?
people are more likely to seek out higher returns elsewhere,
Yeah.
which could push them towards those alternative financial instruments,
Okay.
the near monies.
So financial repression could potentially fuel the growth of near monies,
It could.
further complicating the central bank's attempts to manage the economy.
Exactly. It's like a double whammy. And it highlights the complexity of the financial system
Sure.
and the unintended consequences that can arise from government intervention.
Yeah, it's making me realize that economics is way more intricate than I ever imagined.
It is. It's a fascinating field.
Now, we've explored both models individually,
Yeah,
but I'd love to dig deeper into how they compare and contrast.
absolutely. While both models challenge traditional economic assumptions,
Okay.
they do have distinct focuses.
Okay.
Gurley and Shaw are primarily concerned with the composition of the money supply,
Okay.
those different types of money floating around, particularly near monies.
Right.
They really dive into the mechanics of the financial system,
Okay.
showing how these different forms of money interact
Right.
and impact monetary policy.
So they were like the engineers looking under the hood
Yes,
and figuring out how all the gears and levers work together.
a perfect analogy.
Awesome.
McKinnon and Shaw, on the other hand,
Yeah.
focus on the broader economic impact of government intervention in financial markets.
Okay.
They're analyzing the effects of things like interest rate controls on saving investment and ultimately economic growth.
Okay, so they're taking a more macro view,
Yeah,
looking at the big picture of how government policies influence the overall economy.
precisely. Another key difference is their policy recommendations.
Okay.
Gurley and Shaw's model suggests that regulators should pay close attention to those non-bank financial institutions,
Okay.
where near monies tend to reside.
Right.
It's about recognizing their importance
Mhm.
and potentially bringing them under greater scrutiny.
Makes sense if near monies are playing such a significant role.
Yeah.
You want to make sure they're not creating instability in the system.
Exactly. Meanwhile, McKinnon and Shaw advocate for financial liberalization,
Okay.
removing those artificial constraints on interest rates
Right.
and allowing market forces to determine their levels more freely.
So it's a debate between regulation and deregulation,
In a way, yeah.
with both sides having valid points.
Mm.
But I imagine neither model is without its criticisms.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
For example, some economists argue that Gurley and Shaw may underestimate the central bank's ability to adapt to the presence of near monies.
Okay.
On the other hand, critics of McKinnon and Shaw point to the risks of financial liberalization.
Right, like the possibility of excessive risk-taking
Yes.
and market volatility if regulations are loosened too much.
Exactly.
The 2008 financial crisis is a stark reminder of those dangers.
Absolutely. It highlights the need for a balanced approach
Right.
that considers both the potential benefits
Right.
and the inherent risks associated with liberalizing financial markets.
Finding that sweet spot seems like the eternal challenge for policymakers.
It really is.
So we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But I'm curious, how did these models develop decades ago?
Yeah,
Help us make sense of today's financial landscape.
that's a question worth exploring.
Yeah.
These models might seem like relics of the past, but their insights are surprisingly relevant to modern-day challenges.
Yeah, it's amazing how these economic theories from like decades ago
know.
can still feel so relevant today.
Yeah,
It's like they predicted the future of finance in some ways.
they really did.
Right.
We tapped into some fundamental principles that continue to shape how financial systems operate.
Okay, so help me connect the dots here.
Sure.
How do Gurley and Shaw and McKinnon and Shaw's ideas apply to the financial world we're living in right now?
Well, think about the rise of fintech cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
All these new forms of digital money.
Okay.
They're essentially modern-day near monies.
Wow.
Extremely liquid assets that exist outside the traditional banking system.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
So does that mean we're potentially seeing a resurgence of those concerns that Gurley and Shaw raised about the central bank's ability to control the money supply?
It's certainly a hot topic of debate among economists and policymakers.
Right.
Central banks around the world are grappling with how to regulate these new forms of money. Right.
And ensure they don't pose risks to financial stability.
Right.
It's like a whole new frontier
Yeah.
of financial innovation. And we're still figuring out the rules of the game.
That makes sense. It's exciting, but also a bit daunting
It is, yeah.
to think about how these new technologies are reshaping the financial landscape.
For sure.
What about financial repression?
Yeah.
Does that still happen in today's supposedly free markets?
You know, while explicit interest rate ceilings might be less common today,
Yeah.
governments can still influence financial markets in ways that
Okay.
might benefit them,
Yeah.
but not necessarily individual savers.
Okay, give me an example. What are some of the more subtle ways that financial repression plays out in today's world?
Well, think about regulations that require banks to hold a certain percentage of their assets in government bonds,
Okay.
or policies that encourage banks to lend to specific sectors of the economy,
Right.
even if those sectors might not be the most profitable or efficient.
These actions can distort market signals and potentially lead to a misallocation of capital.
So even in today's complex financial systems, those fundamental tensions between government intervention and free market principles are still very much at play.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that understanding these models can help you navigate the complexities of the financial world with a more critical eye.
It definitely feels like I have a new lens through which to view the financial news and even my own financial decisions.
That's great to hear.
So if we were to distill all of this down to some key takeaways for our listeners, what would you say are the most important things to keep in mind?
I'd say the first takeaway is to be aware of the limitations of traditional economic models.
Okay.
Don't assume that everything works exactly as the textbooks say.
Right.
Be skeptical, question assumptions.
Yeah.
Look for those hidden factors that might be influencing the system.
That sounds like a good life lesson in general.
It is.
Don't just blindly trust the experts. Do your own research and come to your own conclusions.
Exactly. The second takeaway is to be mindful of the potential impact of government policies on your own financial well-being.
Okay.
Stay informed about regulations, interest rate policies,
Right.
other factors that can influence your savings and investments.
So it's not just about picking the right stocks,
Yeah.
or finding the highest yielding savings account.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the larger forces at play that might be shaping those markets.
Precisely. And finally, remember that the financial system is constantly evolving.
Right.
New technologies, new regulations, new global challenges are constantly reshaping the landscape.
For sure.
It's essential to be adaptable, stay informed, and embrace lifelong learning.
That is a great note to end on.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today,
A lot.
exploring these groundbreaking models
Yeah.
and how they connect to the challenges and opportunities of today's financial world.
It's been a fascinating discussion.
I have to say, my understanding of finance feels much richer and more nuanced than it did before we started this deep dive.
That's what we like to hear.
And to our listeners, we hope you're walking away with a newfound appreciation for the complexities of financial systems and a sense of empowerment to navigate them with greater confidence.
Absolutely.
Keep those deep dive requests coming.
We love hearing from you.
And until next time, happy exploring.